Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Behind the Numbers, Stories of Inequity in Wisconsin. This webinar features 6 students from the UW Odyssey Project who tell their personal stories about how inequity has impacted their lives. Because of the intensely personal nature of these stories, the authors will remain anonymous. We are pleased to have with us Jeffrey Lewis from the UW Extension and Kevin Mullen from the UW's Odyssey Project. Jeffrey and Kevin will help us to understand 2 fundamental questions. First, what do these stories tell about us and about the barriers in our community? And second, how do these stories help us to imagine and actualize the transformation needed to advance equity in our community? This is Tom with Forward Community Investments, and we're excited to have you join us today. Before we get going, I'd like to take this opportunity to share some background on how we got here today. Forward Community Investments has been serving the state of Wisconsin for over 20 years. Our mission is to be an investor, connector, and advisor for organizations and initiatives that reduce social, racial, and economic disparities in Wisconsin. Our vision is an equitable and inclusive Wisconsin that is built on cooperative social action. With the help of BMO Harris Bank, we are able to offer this series of webinars to provide partners with tools and approaches that can be used to advance racial equity within their work. BMO Harris Bank is an active partner in Wisconsin communities and demonstrates strong corporate citizenship. At this point, I'd like to share a little bit of information about the actual slides that we will be sharing in the GoToWebinar software. You can join the webinar using the telephone number provided for you in the confirmation email that was sent from GoToWebinar, or you can use your computer speakers. I will note that if you are experiencing issues with the audio through your computer speakers, we would recommend that you use a landline telephone for optimum sound. We do ask that if you do use your phone, please use the mute function so we do not pick up any unwanted noise. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to submit them using the chat or questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Now that we have those tasks out of the way, let's get to know our speakers. Jeffrey Lewis is the Outreach Specialist for Underrepresented Communities for the UW Extension. Jeffrey has conducted community-based research and evaluation in urban schools and communities for more than 20 years. He focuses on inclusion, equity, and institutional change. Jeffrey brings a social design and assets-based approach to his work and has a particular interest in building the relationships and social infrastructure within schools and communities by identifying and building capacity within the people involved so that they can work together to find solutions to their problems and challenges. Kevin Mullen is the Assistant Director of the UW Odyssey Project. Kevin recently completed his doctorate in literary studies with a minor in composition and rhetoric at UW-Madison. He has been teaching English language, literature, and writing for over 15 years in a number of places. For instance, Bulgaria, Turkey, with 1 year in Istanbul and the other in the Southeast, Japan, Iowa, and now here in Madison. He has been working with the UW Odyssey Project for the last 3 years and is currently the Assistant Director. At the core of his teaching is the belief that the humanities can empower individuals to transform their lives by developing their voices and understanding where they are in the larger history of ideas. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Kevin, who will talk about the impact of the UW Odyssey Project is doing in the community. Kevin will be followed by Jeffrey, who will set the stage for the stories and will provide a brief discussion between each. Jeffrey will then summarize the discussion by sharing his thoughts on what these stories reveal about our community and what kinds of transformations need to be considered and thoughtfully implemented. If we have time at the end, we will open things up for a Q&A discussion. Please remember to use the chat or questions function to send any questions or comments that you might have. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you to Samira and to Forward Community Investments for both organizing this event and for inviting our students to tell these stories. Before we begin to get into the stories, I thought I might give a little background about Odyssey, where it began and what it does. So Odyssey started back in 2003 as a free 2-semester humanities course for adults living near the poverty line. And this course was founded and is still directed by Emily Auerbach, who is a professor both in the UW English department and in the Division of Continuing Studies. And it's taught by UW faculty members who each cover a different part of the course. So we have one professor in history, one in art history, philosophy, literature, and then writing. The students come from a wide range of backgrounds and ages, and they each earn 6 credits from UW-Madison while acquiring the kind of skills and knowledge necessary for succeeding at the college level. And there's a lot of barriers in between them and that kind of success, such as childcare costs and college debt, transportation, even glasses. If they break their glasses and have a hard time reading books, all of these things can get in the way of their success. So over the last 13 years, we've been able to see that this class has transformed our students' lives. For example, one of the slides that you'll see in this rotation here, I'll put it up, is Onward Odyssey. And in that slide, there are 3 graduates from our program. On the left, where there are 2 children, is Tina, who was homeless when she started Odyssey and has recently graduated from the UW. She is currently now working as a business executive at a major corporation. She told us that her son, who's also in the photo, had switched from saying, "if I go to college," to "when I go to college," while she was in Odyssey. Next to her in the upper right-hand corner is Josephine, who's a refugee from Sudan and who recently completed her master's in social work. Her career goal is to work with refugees so that they can recover from an often violent past and adjust to their new home. And in the bottom right corner is Stanley, whose artistic skills and confidence have flourished since he took Odyssey, and is currently a graphic designer and web developer for UW's Division of Continuing Studies. This is just a small sample of some of the students who have used Odyssey as a springboard to launch both their academic and professional careers. So what started as a small program, though, has kind of expanded over the years, and we now have Odyssey Junior, which I'll pull up that slide, which works with the children of Odyssey students on the same night as the main class. This last year, we had 55 kids in 3 different classrooms, one for ages 2 to 5, another for grades 1 to 5, and a third for grades 6 to 12. Each classroom is focused on the arts and humanities and works in concert with the main class so that the themes align. For example, if we're discussing resilience in a Langston Hughes poem with the adults, we might have the youngest age group reading the Itsy Bitsy Spider, which is also about resilience. And in this way, our students and their children can find commonalities in what they're doing in each classroom as they talk around the kitchen table. We've also started to develop classes for Odyssey alumni to help them continue in their educational journeys. For example, this summer, for the 2nd year in a row, we've teamed up with the UW Education Department and the Madison Metropolitan School District to teach a special education teacher's aides class. The exciting thing about this class is that while earning 2 more credits from UW, alumni are being trained to help children with special needs, and it leads to a job within the school system. What I love about this class is that it addresses so many problems at the same time. There's a need in the Madison school system for more special ed assistance. There are children in the system that could benefit from the life experience and insights of our alumni, and this can be the beginning of a long, satisfying career for our students. One of the main goals of Odyssey is to help our students improve their writing skills and cultivate their voices. For this project with Forward Community Investments, we sent out a prompt to our alumni that asked them to write a story where they recount a moment in their past where they experienced inequity in housing, education, or employment. We received some amazingly powerful narratives, but because of time, we limit ourselves to 6 of them. It is our hope that these stories will help move the discussion around inequity in Wisconsin, which we all know is a gigantic problem, beyond the abstraction of numbers so that we can have a better understanding of what it feels like to live in the environment those numbers describe. So now I'm going to move the mic over here to Jeffrey to continue.
Thank you, Kevin. I also want to thank FCI and Kevin for the opportunity to both read and listen to the stories that we're going to be sharing with you today. They're really quite remarkable. And the first thing actually I want to say to you is that the stories really stand on their own. They don't need me, they don't need Kevin. The voices of these women, their stories, their experiences, what they have to say is rich and evocative, intelligently written, and deserve our full attention today. And what they need for us to do is listen to them deeply with humility and place them in the center of our hearts and our minds so that we might just begin to understand what they have to teach us. These are the stories of remarkable women. They're extremely smart, hardworking, courageous, persistent, generous, resilient, and of good heart. But they're also the voices and stories of very ordinary women. And by that I mean that the women represented by these stories are women that exist in all of our communities, particularly working class and low-income communities. They're common. This is that they're often invisible, they're often silenced, they're often just ignored. Or we see them only through the lens of deficits, or if we're trying to, quote unquote, help, we see them only through the lens of our helping, rather from their own power, their own abilities, their own aspirations. So these stories offer us an opportunity to make visible that which has been invisible, those who we fail to truly see, to center their voices, voices that are all too often silenced as much by those who seek to help as those who seek to deny them. Now, I've been asked to say something about what the stories tell us about the barriers faced by those marginalized by race, ethnicity, by their sex and social class status. And as you listen to the stories, the barriers will be obvious to you. You'll recognize them immediately, and you won't be surprised. But there were two themes that came up over and over again that I thought was worth bringing attention to. One was that there are discriminatory policies that aid and reinforce stereotypes, fears, and racism. And that's one. The second being that these interpersonal forms of bias and racism are exercised with little or no accountability or recourse. So over and over again, you'll hear the women talk about or bring attention to different kinds of policies and practices that are quote unquote legal, but that effectively deny them, again, their basic rights and become overwhelming barriers. Underlying all of this, again, is this arbitrary wielding of power supported by private and public policies and practices. They're also, frankly, supported by our collective silence, inaction, and neglect. We're all implicated in the stories that you're about to hear. These women point out over and over again the structural, institutional, and interpersonal forms of violence that deny them their basic human rights. And I think that's important because we're talking about human rights. Human rights are not, they're granted to you by virtue of the fact that you're born into the world. It's not about merit. It's not about being able to pay. It's not even about hard work. They're about what we each deserve by virtue of the fact that we're born into the world. And we routinely deny citizens of those basic rights: education, housing, safety, a living wage. We routinely deny them that, and these will be stories of how we do that. So the women remind us of many things. A couple of them remind us of how the historical roots of oppression combine with social policies and personal attitudes to deny access to rights, and how this impoverishes our society as a whole. Another one in particular reminds us that if your heart is tethered to the brown bodies of others that others despise, in her words, it's not enough even to be white. Another reminds us how hard single mothers of color work, how intelligent and strategic they can be, and that even when they go above and beyond what is expected and have, in her words, wrapped their hearts around hope, the hope of relief, they're denied by the exercise of this arbitrary power by those who despise or fear them. Another reminds us of the cumulative and compounding effects of inequality, which is reproduced with the aid of policies and practices that, in her words, interrupt any chance of sunshine in her life, and that, in her words again, give birth to injustice every day. Still another reminds us that policies and systems can be little more than, quote unquote, a legal form of exclusion, as well as the deep change. And she also reminds us of the deep changes in the structures of opportunity in our society that has resulted in the vicious cycle of the haves and have-nots. And finally, another in her generous and evocative voice really reminds us how our assumptions and biases make invisible those in our midst, that no matter how intelligent, passionate, and motivated one may be, often it is those who are supposed to uplift that impose the most limitations, who fail to see who people as they are, let alone who and what they can become. So again, I think we want to listen to this with an ear towards how are we implicated in these stories, because we're everywhere in them, I will suggest. When I first read the stories, I was reminded of a quote from what I believe was a Palestinian peace activist who, referring to the aspirations of his people and others working for peace, said something like, "All we really want is the quiet miracle of a normal life." So I invite you now to listen to these stories and give thoughts of what we can do to help these women and others like them achieve the quiet miracle of a normal life.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. And mind a little bit of...
When I was 18 years old, I left Mexico and moved to Wisconsin, and all I knew how to say in English was good morning, thank you, and sorry, no English. I could understand almost everything I heard, but I had yet to acquire enough vocabulary to reply back. That was about to change since I managed to get enrolled into high school soon after my arrival. It was the first day of school, and I was happy to get my class schedule, which consisted of ESL English Beginners, American Citizenship, ESL Algebra, and my favorite, art. I was especially looking forward to art class because I am able to express what I really feel without the need of a spoken language. Art provides comfort to my soul because I feel a sense of freedom, for there are no rules to follow, and I get to create my own little world in which I finally feel like I belong. That first day in high school, I went from class to class, and thankfully, there was always someone helping me translate what the teacher wanted. After lunch, it was finally time to start creating, so I started looking for the art classroom. But I got lost in the way there because all the hallways look exactly the same. When I finally found the right room, my stomach twisted. I was nervous and embarrassed because I was late for the class I was the most excited for. My knuckles felt as though they were frozen, but somehow I managed to knock. After a few seconds, the art teacher answered the door. All the students' heads turned my way, and everything got quiet. The most silent silence I've ever experienced. I mumbled a shy hi and handed my schedule to the teacher, and as I caught a better look inside the room, my attention shifted. The classroom had papers of all kinds and colors. I could smell the heartwarming scent of oil paint, and I quickly spotted little buckets filled with paintbrushes. When I finally removed my eyes from the classroom and met the teacher's eyes, she looked puzzled, expecting me to answer the questions she had asked. And so were the students who were still staring at me. I am sure that if I hadn't been so nervous, I would have been able to answer. The teacher narrowed her eyes. Then she proceeded to tell me, "I'm afraid you won't be able to make it in this class. You won't understand the assignments at all. Have your counselor remove this class from your schedule." She said that in front of the whole class. Then she got closer to my ear and whispered, "I'm afraid the students will eat you alive." I wanted to scream, to tell her that I could understand very well, that I was going to have peers translate the assignments for me. I wanted to beg her to give me a chance, but I didn't know how to put together the little English I had. She motioned me to move, and when I stepped back, she shut the door quite literally on my face. I don't know how I managed to make my way to the ESL office, for my eyes were blurred with tears. I explained what had happened to the bilingual specialist, and she took me to my counselor. Together, they found a spot for me into ESL biology and took away art class. I was placed into ESL or English as a second language classes throughout my high school education, and I was treated as though I could not handle anything outside from that. As a result, I was really insecure when I started taking college classes in MATC. I myself felt as though I could not handle the pace of the classes or the content of the books. I began to think that sometimes the people that are supposed to uplift us as students imposes limitations upon us. I believe that there should be more tools and programs to assess ESL students to place them into regular classes when and if they are ready. And I feel that I was kept from knowledge, and even to this day I have yet to catch up on those subjects that were denied to me in high school. On the last day of high school, I was walking through the art class hallway, and the same art teacher who shut the door on my face waved at me shyly and said, "Goodbye, Saida. We will miss you here." I had surely not forgotten about the first day of school, but it definitely took me by surprise that she hadn't forgotten who I was either. After I graduated, I went to MATC and I took as many classes as I could afford, and most of them had to do with art. When I could no longer pay for my education, I decided to invest the last of my savings into an advanced creative photography class, in which I had the freedom to experiment with analog photography, and I learned to develop and print film. It's funny to me how I was finally making art while playing with chemicals inside a darkroom. I printed my own magic, and I made others see it. This time around, it was quite different. I had all the classroom and materials to myself. My teacher, Nelson, let me do pretty much whatever I wanted in that darkroom. Those doors were always open for me, and I would be the first person to arrive. By the time my classmates got to the class, I had my rolls drying and ready to print and pour my art onto the paper. My favorite part was seeing the images appear slowly as I shook the tray. To me, magic was to bring the images alive and sealing them forever, not only in the paper, but in my heart.
Great.
So it's hard for me to even begin to respond to such a powerful story. And what I want to do, I think, with each of the stories is, rather than me giving a lot of commentary or any commentary, is to invite us to think about what it is that we can do to help this person achieve a quiet miracle of a normal life. This is the work of the heart. This is the work of social transformation. And so I want you to hold it in your heart and think about, how do we participate? How do we support this person achieving that miracle?
Great. And then we'll head on to the next story.
It's really not fair. I've lived in the United States since I was 3 months old. I don't know any other country, yet it feels like I'm being pushed out of the one I found comfort in, my home. My parents came here for the sole purpose of survival, and they've survived. My dad has worked 40, sometimes more than that, hours a week for almost 21 years. This job he's worked is not a job that most would want, but he didn't come here to pick and choose, and he knows that. For many years, my dad worked in factories with horrible conditions. Unfortunately, my dad was fired from his factory job 3 years ago because he didn't have the right documentation to work legally in the country. Currently, he is working as a mechanic doing side jobs for his friend. Both my parents have been law-abiding contributors to this country. My mom raised kids that have good ethics and who have a desire to help this country just as much as anyone else. I've tutored kids who will one day be taking care of you in old age. I've been here my 21 years of life to find out who I am and how that can help this country prosper. This country needs immigrants, and we need this country. My siblings and I have graduated high school and have worked just like our white counterparts. I'm pursuing higher education. Why is it so difficult to understand that immigrants are not here to cause destruction? They're here to contribute to a country that needs us. AB 450 is a bill that allows police to impound cars when the drivers don't have driver's license. SB 533, a bill signed by Governor Scott Walker, will block counties throughout Wisconsin from providing identification cards to undocumented immigrants. AB 450 will create obstacles for people who drive and will limit their access to jobs, while SB 533 will make it difficult for individuals to prove that they are who they say they are. Both laws make immigrants feel more frightened and unwelcomed. I want to let everyone know on here that it scares and saddens me to think that beautiful, smart, generous, hardworking, and overall great humans are not wanted here by some. DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is an immigration policy which allows immigrants who entered the U.S. before their 16th birthday and before June 2007 to obtain a renewable 2-year work permit. I'm a DACA student, which means I can work legally in the U.S., but that's it. The president who gets elected next will have a say in whether DACA will be eliminated and whether there will be mass deportation. Even though I can work, I can't get federal aid to go to school. I really want to be able to afford college, but I can't. There are many students with the same obstacles as mine to higher education, not only DACA students. Right now, I'm working really hard to pay for just 2 or 3 classes a semester, but it's still not enough. I've been in Madison College for 2 years now, and I'm nowhere near to being able to transfer to UW because I don't have the 64 credits required. I can't afford Madison College. I wish DACA students could have access to FAFSA, but we don't. I have to worry about my family being separated, at the same time worry about how I'm going to pay for classes at Madison College. As an immigrant to these United States, I feel like I too deserve an education. We all deserve education. When a society is educated, everyone benefits. We need a population that is educated on differences because that makes people more open-minded and more accepting of cultural and ethnic differences. Education also gives everyone the opportunity for social mobility and allows us to see beyond our own experiences. Not only will an education help me, but it will help Wisconsin, which needs all the help it can get. I want to help Wisconsin by getting educated and using my skills and knowledge for the betterment of tomorrow. There's a belief that undocumented immigrants do not pay taxes. I'm here to tell you that this is false. Every undocumented immigrant that works here pays taxes. We pay for the system, and we don't get the benefits from it. My parents every year have to pay taxes for a system that won't let them retire and that won't let their children get educated. The promise America gives is of a better future. With laws and attitudes that prohibit immigrants from getting an education and having access to upward mobility, the promise of a better future is simply not possible.
I think in these first 2 stories, one of the things, Jeffrey, and you can correct me if you, or let me know if you see something else, is you can hear this desire to learn, a desire to kind of, a curiosity for new information, for new ideas, and also a desire to become successful and give back in the future, right?
And in this particular story, I think what really strikes me is about how she speaks to contributing to the society as a whole.
Yeah. That
over and over again, she starts there and she weaves it throughout her story that it's not just about her and her family, though that's central. It's about how they can and would like to contribute to our collective well-being.
Right, which then brings up the idea of whether or not these laws that stop people from reaching those kinds of futures, whether or not they end up hurting the society itself.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
When I was challenged to write an essay recalling an experience where I felt inequity in Wisconsin, I did not have the mental capacity to wrap the term around my life experiences. Yet I knew that inequity was alive and well in my life. So, like any other time I am challenged, I turned to Google. What is inequity? The definition I found, a noun, meaning lack of fairness or justice. The thought was immediate. CCAP, I heard shouted in my head. Inequity at its finest. A system designed by Wisconsin. Growing up poor and in disadvantaged circumstances, life was always a challenge. As I grew, I accumulated debt, failed to pay parking tickets, and made poor choices that led to felony convictions. All documented on www.wisconsincourts.gov, or CCAP, as though that know it well will call it, for anyone to view. It has been one of my biggest barriers as I struggle to get my life right. It has not mattered that it is over a decade since my last conviction, that I am a Dean's List student going on 4 semesters now, and that I work full-time to feed my family. CCAP is that black cloud that interrupts any chance of sunshine. Living in Madison, Wisconsin, I have found that potential employers and landlords use CCAP as their main tool in the screening process. They wait to check references, ask questions, and listen to explanation. If what they see online is too much for them, it is immediate rejection. Of course, too much varies. Usually anything is enough. I would bet big that most don't click on the link to view independent case details. Outside of that, I don't believe that most even understand what they are reading. If you don't have the knowledge to understand the differences of CFs, CMs, TRs, and FAs, all entries look bad to the layman and instill a subconscious fear. I do not have specific details. This assignment has triggered my curiosity enough that I will seek confirmation. But from what I have understood, WisconsinCourts.gov has been identified as a problem and is still here, readily accessible, and that we are one of the very few states that have such a library of information available for all to see online. CCAP has ruined my ability to speak for myself and kept me and my baby girl homeless when we've had the means to pay. Every time I find myself in a place where I need employment or housing, I suffer anxiety. I know that it will be a minimum of 40 applications before I ever get a call back, and that the task in front of me is almost impossible. I have been turned away multiple times and have trained myself to pray and keep going. Someone in the state will eventually start with me and not the Wisconsin Court Access page. Today, I still live in below standard housing and work a low-income job because I cannot get over the CCAP hump to be considered anywhere with real worth. Inequity in Wisconsin is represented well by the design of the state's court access page. CCAP reeks of inequity and bursts injustice every day.
Great. I just wanted to give a little insight into the student who wrote this. So she was in our first year of Odyssey and then was incarcerated for several years and came back in our 12th year, rejoined the class, finished the entire class, has since gone on to get, I think, somewhere around 45 or 50 credits through MTC. She has been working full-time, going to school full-time, and as well as taking care of her family, and just is incredibly motivated in terms of where she's going.
And again, I think this is another clear example of how arbitrary these systems are, how they fail to allow us to really see a person and to make decisions based on who they are and what they've accomplished. And again, I think it strikes me that people are wielding that power and are using a system that they may not even understand. And again, there's no accountability and there's no recourse for her.
And it creates the situation you alluded to at the beginning of invisibility,
Exactly.
where the person herself is not being seen, but just a record of past conduct.
And how many of us would even know that back? We see her situation and we make assumptions. We have no idea of what she has gone through and what she's trying to overcome.
That's right.
Today's standards are not like they used to be when I was growing up. It was easy just to walk into a fast food place or a restaurant, sit down and fill out an application, and then start the process of showing your employment worth. Credit checks prevent the qualified from finding employment and effectively repaying their dues. Although these checks are considered a soft hit against an individual's report for each job application that is completed, presently it is nothing more than a legal form of exclusion against those that are constantly reminded of financial mistakes of the past or simply due to the lack of opportunity for crucial financial education. I am one of those people that still struggles to find ways to turn this personal battle around for the better. There are minimal job options in place for someone like myself in this area or any other when one-sided credit checks are included in the hiring process. It is unfortunate that we live in a society that can legally eliminate applicants based on their creditworthiness and without being given a chance to explain or outline their past or current financial situation. I have made several suggestions on the federal, state, county, and city levels when applying for jobs. Some jobs require a signed statement agreeing to a garnishment of my wages, if hired, that is allowed by law. I am often told that the process is too expensive and too much of a burden for an organization to handle. I have also written to the White House under several different presidencies, my local Congress officials, and other local political leaders, asking for assistance or just for a moment to be heard. The standard automated reply is, "Thank you for contacting us, and what is your email address so you too can receive the latest updates from your Wisconsin representatives?" Needless to say, this does not help me or others like myself through my ongoing job search when fighting to secure employment. So that leaves Wisconsinites with various levels of extended college education in the dark. The only way to get ahead is to hustle the best way you can or lose. The vicious circle of the haves and the have-nots continues on. I am not asking for a handout. I desire to be viewed and included for my skills and abilities. I have several work qualities that I desire to include in an organization to help it flourish. As it stands, I feel very few employers will objectively be able to see them as long as credit checks are viewed as a fair way to judge someone's employability. Please do not continue to feed on the continued stereotypes that keep people from advancing on the jobs of their dreams, all because a credit check is the final say on who is employment worthy and who is not.
Great. So I think, Jeffrey, one of the things that I'm hearing in here is kind of resonating from some of the other stories is that because of a situation here, it's credit, there's a lack of access to different forms of stabilizing things, so work or housing or education. All the things that will go towards a future success are being stunted and disallowing this individual to then actually go back and repay these debts, whatever those debts may be.
And I think what's important to keep in mind is that the mistakes that she describes are common, and that the difference between her and maybe someone like me is that I have resources to pay for my mistakes before they become compounded. And so often, again, what we're looking at are the cumulative effects of having low income or being impoverished. And we sometimes confuse the outcomes, someone having chronic debt problems, with their condition, the fact that we have this inequality in terms of income and access to well-paying jobs. So her behaviors are no different than a lot of people in the society. It's not just her social class status or anything like that, but it's about being low income and having those issues being compounded, and then again policies that allow people to treat her with discrimination as a result of that. But we need to get at the underlying condition, which is the inequality, that it doesn't allow her to make mistakes.
That's right. And the question is also, where these debts might even come from. They could come from education, right? They could come from a car breaking down and you have to get to work the next day, and so you then have to take that hit on your credit, right? So there is no wiggle room in this situation.
No wiggle room.
Yeah, great.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Also, I'd like to mention at this point, if you do have any comments or questions, feel free to share them using the chat or questions feature on the right-hand side of your screen. With some time following these stories, we'll be answering and taking comments.
Ever wanted in life was to ensure that my sons are raised in the best environment, one that is safe where I would not have to constantly worry about us being targeted for the negative. Finding proper housing that will accept a single Black woman with 2 young children is extremely hard. I had been turned down so many times solely because of the pigment of my skin and where I come from. It's like no one wants to consistently give us hardworking single mothers of color a fighting chance. Instead, we must jump through hoops to obtain what any decent, upstanding citizen of Madison should be entitled to, which is equality, fairness, and equal treatment. I can recall one time in general when I was without a stable home for 2 months. My children and I were forced to sleep on the floor of my friend's apartment. I was working over 80 hours a week, every single week, saving every penny that I had earned
so that I could afford a residence for my children and me to stay in. Once I managed to do my research and configure the numbers in my head, I had managed to save enough money that would allow me to pay my security deposit and at least 2 months of rent in advance. I began applying for apartments all over the city, though mainly in areas I felt my children would be safe and have a chance to prosper. After putting in a numerous amount of applications, I was finally given a few callbacks. There was one place in particular, located in some prairie, that I was especially excited to have gotten a response from. The supervisor further shocked me when she said that she would like to meet me the following Monday so that we could do a walkthrough and go over the specifics. I was so happy that I was literally floating on air until I went into work the next day and was told I would not be able to take that Monday off. I went into panic mode because I needed this place and my time was running out. I had already wrapped my heart around getting approved for the place. The next day, I called the supervisor back and told her that I would not be able to make it that particular Monday, but that I could send my cousin over for the walkthrough and chat about the details with her, in which she said would be fine. That Monday came and my cousin went in my place for the showing. When the meeting had concluded, my cousin stated that the supervisor told her that she was sure I would get the apartment. She said that I had met all of her qualifications, and the fact that I was able to pay for a few months in advance showed that I was serious about obtaining that residence. I received a call 2 days later from the property manager, and she asked me if it was at all possible to set up a time where we could meet face-to-face. That Friday I was free, and she agreed to meet me at the place at 3 p.m. The first thing she did when she opened the door and I extended my hand announcing who I was frown up her face and say, "Your cousin. Is that really your cousin? How is it that you are, a woman of color?" My stomach dropped and I immediately felt sick. Then she looked down upon my 2 children and said, "There aren't any of them around here, so they wouldn't have much fun. You will probably feel more better in an urban area." Then she slammed the door in my face. I broke down in front of the door with my arms wrapped around my children. I will never forget that day for as long as I live. I have never felt so hopeless and so worthless.
So this was a story from one of our students from this last year, and she actually turned in 2 stories that were equally as powerful. We had to choose one. So what are some of the things that you're hearing here, Jeffrey?
Well, there's so many things. The thing that jumps out at me at the beginning of the story, I mean, this is, again, another example of where someone's actually gone above and beyond what you would expect, what anyone would expect. Working, essentially 2 jobs, it sounds like, just to earn enough for a few months. Think about how little she must have made that she had to work so many hours in order to save the money to be able to offer that to a potential place for renting. And again, being denied. So that it doesn't matter that you've met the standard or exceeded the standard, that the ability of an individual to arbitrarily decide, based in this case on racism, to deny you, again, it's a constant recurring theme.
Yeah, and what's so powerful to me is all the barriers that she was able to kind of overcome and push through, and then still facing, even when she's there, one last one that closes the door, right?
It's amazing. I mean, one of the things that strikes me again throughout the stories is that, again, it goes back into the arbitrary nature of these isms, is that it doesn't matter how far you go, how hard you try, how much you even succeed, that at any given day, in any given circumstance, you can be blindsided by, again, someone arbitrarily applying their power against you.
And usually in these stories, it's a door being closed in somebody's face.
Literally.
Literally.
My first job was with a large employer in Madison, and I spent 10 years there, which was a pretty big accomplishment from someone in my family. Most of my family did not work, were on Social Security, or did what they could to get by. I am the white girl in my family. My sisters are biracial, and over our lifetimes, I have seen them struggle. I asked my father, who is African American, why I was doing okay, but my sisters were not. He said that they didn't try as hard as I did. I wanted to believe that, but the truth is that I knew that I had privileges that they did not. As long as I was quiet about the dark roots in my family, then I was afforded the opportunities that came with having white skin. When I took the time to share that my family was black, including my children, then I would find that those privileges would be taken away. As a youth in high school, I would be invited to sleepovers and then disinvited when the parents found out that my father was black. None of my white friends were allowed to sleep at my house, and when we were accused of youthful transgressions, their parents would say it was because of my bad influence. Never mind that I was the one who was afraid to do wrong, and that, unlike their children, I did not have access to stock liquor cabinets or my own car to use to skip school and drive out of town. While working for this large employer, I became the safe person for my white colleagues to seek out when they had questions about black people or culture. In fact, I wore a t-shirt occasionally that said, "It's a black thing, you wouldn't understand," as a way to point this out. It flew over their heads and only made it easier for them to come to me with questions and stereotypes. One colleague made a clip art picture of people in our department, and my character was brown, much more brown than my actual skin color, which in fact is closer to theirs. This gave me tremendous insight into how I was seen at work. It didn't bother me, but it let me know that some of the things that I was experiencing there were a result of this perception. Eventually, I left to go on to work in the field of social justice. At this time, my children were growing up in Madison schools, and I began to see that this would also be a minefield to navigate. Sadly, this would open my eyes to the personal side of racism and its effects on my family, as my children were now the target. My youngest son came home from kindergarten one day. I asked him how his day was, and he said, "Mommy, it hurts to be brown. I don't want to be brown anymore." This tore me up inside. I, of course, shared that those same children would eventually spend time outside hoping to get their skin to be the beautiful shade of caramel that his was, but it didn't matter. He was already aware of the pain that came with having darker skin. My oldest daughter was facing her own demons at school and was the focus of behavioral problems that brought me to school every day for months. One day, when I had received a call minutes after dropping her off, I asked school staff, "What happens when I drop her off? She hasn't even made it to class yet." The response was, "Well, her and her friends congregate in the hallway, and when I yell at them to get to class, they get loud and disrespectful." My response was, "Have you tried not yelling at them? Perhaps using something like, 'Ladies, can you help me clear the hallways?' might work. These young ladies don't respond well to being yelled at." "Oh, I had not thought of that," she replied. I never got another call after that, and eventually my child turned her behavior around when she was treated with dignity and respect and became a leader in her school. In my lifetime, I have seen the underbelly of racism in the face of those who practice it up close and personal. Some of them have expressed their feelings directly to my face, not knowing that my heart is tethered to the brown bodies that they despise. I have also felt the benefit of white privilege and had it taken away quickly once it was determined that I was guilty by my black and brown associations. I hope that one day we can be honest about these realities and see the pain that they cause, not just the intended targets, but the very fabric and heart of our community.
Terrific. I think one of the things that's really interesting about this story is because she is occupying two different places in society, she has a hard time understanding what is her and what is kind of society allowing or restricting her to be certain things. Right?
No, I think that's true. I think for her, and I think in some ways really for all of the students and women, the spaces that they occupy are contradictory spaces. That they live within a world that, on the one hand, they do what is expected. Again, they overcome tremendous barriers. They demonstrate tremendous assets, and on the other hand, they're still denied over and over again. So they get a double message around their identity. I think it's a contradictory space that they live in often. I was also sort of struck by in this last story the idea that it's a simple thing, but I think we lose sight of it. That the behavior of the child changed when she was treated with respect and dignity. And again, I think sometimes that speaks to changes in her environment. It's not about her changing fundamentally. It's about creating the conditions for her to be the best that she can be. And I think that applies to all of these women, is that we haven't figured out how do we create the conditions, both those interpersonal, those institutional, and those structural conditions for them to be the best that they can be. Yeah.
No, I think that's one of the things that I think is really the motivating animus of Odyssey, is to, by kind of going through history and philosophy and art and all these different ways, to help students figure out their own space, to kind of become the best person, like you were saying, that they could be, right? So as a society, we have to take away some of the barriers that are stopping them from getting there, though.
Right, I agree. We need to take away the barriers, and I think we also need to create new spaces. So as I think about some of the implications of these stories, at least from my perspective, if I may, Tom.
Absolutely, yes.
So clearly, I think we all have a responsibility to use what influence, what capital, whatever we have, to begin to challenge and dismantle those policies and practices that are the barriers that they're facing, that are our public ones in particular, or our institutional ones. So again, I would challenge each of us to look at the places we work in our sort of spheres of influence, and really assess to what extent are we actually contributing to these barriers, unwittingly or not. But I also think that we need to find ways to create and expand spaces where women like these, or people like these, in this case women, can sort of self-define the spaces and the work within them. That I feel like we collectively, there's a tendency, I think, in our response to address inequality, racial and otherwise, to look for a kind of a helping model. And so we tend to put resources through surrogates to try to address the needs, rather than figuring out a way to get resources directly to the people most affected, so that they're empowered to find the best solutions that are going to have lasting impact on their lives, but that will also help, build their capacity. And so I think we really need to rethink our strategy around some of these issues around inequality, and think if we can't do more to really build both the capacity of individuals, but I think it's a collective capacity. I think we need to figure out how do we help people who are marginalized and disempowered come together. And there's a lot of we in these stories. And I think there's at least an intuitive kind of stance towards collective work on the to improve their lives. It's not just their individual mobility, though that's important. It's in the context of relationships, communities and families and society. And so how do we empower women like these to actually have the resources directly to come up with the best solutions and implement the best solutions they're going to address the challenges they have in their lives, and support each other in that?
Yeah, and that kind of support and a community, I think, was really articulated beautifully in the last essay about feeling tethered to these bodies that are facing the injustice. That we should all feel tethered in different ways to the people who are being stopped from reaching their potential.
Right, I totally agree with that.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and sharing the stories and all the wonderful, insightful comments. So please join me in thanking the 6 Odyssey Project students who contributed their stories, Jeffrey Lewis and Kevin Mullen for the stories and the stories and the important discussion, and BMO Harris Bank for their support. As with all of our webinars, we did record it, and it will be made available for playback on our website. You can also find links to the 5 previous webinars of this racial equity series on our website. We will be sending up a follow-up message to all attendees with links to more resources from the presentation and the aforementioned link to the recording of the presentation. I would encourage all participants to review our website at forwardci.org for more information on how forward community investments might help your organization. We will be taking a break in the month of July from our webinars, but we will be back in late summer, early fall with another installment. One final note, when you close your browser from this session, you will be directed to a very concise questionnaire to evaluate today's webinar. Please take a few minutes to complete that questionnaire to help us continue to improve the effectiveness of these offerings. Thanks again to BMO Harris Bank for making this exceptional learning opportunity available, and keep doing good. Take care, everyone.